Today we're going to be installing the RC4WD drive chassis servo mount kit onto my Axial SCX-10 crawler. This moves the servo up off of the axle and onto the chassis to provide a more scale appearance. Okay, this is my Toyota Tundra Alaska Mountain Rescue themed crawler. It's a Tamiya body on an Axial SCX-10 honcho chassis with RC4WD drive 1.7 steel beadlock wheels on rock crusher tires. And again, today we're going to be installing the RC4WD drive chassis servo mount kit. Basically just gets the servo up off of the chassis. As you can see, it is mounted here in stock form and makes it a little bit more scale. I've already removed all of my mounting screws, so we're just going to start taking the body off so we can start moving the chassis and installing the kit. So we take off the bumper here, put that aside, take off the bed, and finally the body. And so here you can see the servo mounted to the chassis. It's a little closer so you guys can see. Mounted to the axle, excuse me, and we're going to be moving up into this location here onto the chassis rails themselves. So the first thing we need to do is to actually start disconnecting the various servo points. So first off, we're going to disconnect here. Which is our servo arm connection point. And then we're going to disconnect the servo itself from the mounting points here with the ears. And now our servo is loose. We'll set that aside. And now we're actually going to remove the servo mount from the axle. And we'll set all of that aside because we're probably going to reuse a couple pieces. And we'll move the chassis aside. And here we have the RC4WD drive chassis servo mount kit. We're going to open this up and we get a couple of different aluminum mounts. We have a new chassis brace that's going to go across the chassis. Another brace. We get a new arm that will connect to our knuckle, our steering arm knuckle that is, and a bag of screws. We do not get any instructions at all. However, looking at the RC4WD drive website, you can see the photographs of it and see quite clearly how it's put together. So we'll just take each one of these out of their bags. Got all the screws, set those to the side here. And all of our braces. If we bring the chassis back over, we can see that this large brace is going to go in place of this smaller brace here. I say smaller just because it's plastic. It's not quite as hefty as this aluminum one, which you can see here. So the first thing we need to do is actually take out all of these screws here and here, these four that are holding the upper shock, to get this brace out. And then we can lift up the chassis and slide that brace out. Okay, so we're going to slide in our back brace. It's a longer one. I'm going to put that into position here. That'll sit roughly there. And at the same time, we're also going to put in our front brace because when we start tying the chassis together here, it'll be more difficult to get this to fit in place. And we can identify the screws that we need to use for the shock hoops here, because the shock hoops have a tapered hole, meaning they get smaller as it goes deeper. So we can see easily which screws those are. There's only 4 of them. And our screws for the front brace will just be a regular cap head screw, meaning they're flat, they don't taper. And this only takes 2 screws, as there's pins for the end pieces. And the next step is to take our smallest brace here. We're going to take 2 of our longer screws, we're going to run those through the back, or the larger 2 holes here on the open side. And these are going to mount into our back brace, or rear brace. And we're going to need to remove our servo horn, as the servo is going to be sitting in a completely different position, so we need to reset that to get everything back to 0. So in this case, with this servo horn, we have 2 grub screws or set screws on either side of it, clamping it down in place. So we need to loosen those, and then we can remove our center screw. And we can take our horn off. Now, I always put our center screw right back in place. These screws are easy to lose, and you quite often don't have a lot of replacements for them. So we're going to set our servo down vertically in this position here, and what we're actually going to be doing is putting the front servo ear over the front brace, and in the back it's going to go underneath the brace. So now we have our servo mounted. The next thing we need to address is installing the longer arm so that we can reach our servo horn. You can see the difference here. So we just need to back off this end. That out and take off this segment. Set that aside and we put the new segment on. What we need to do is actually hook everything up, turn on our transmitter, get the servo recentered, then we can put the servo horn on and get everything connected up. Okay, so I've connected my battery up, I've connected my servo back into my receiver, and I've got my radio on. This has allowed me to recenter the servo so that it's sitting in its neutral middle position. And now we can actually turn the chassis up. Move everything on the other side, of course, because we're going to turn it upside down. Okay, so now we can see where we want to mount our servo horn. And we can see it's not quite dead straight, it doesn't quite reach straight across. So we want to be about 1 tooth off to the side. And that gives us just about a perfect lineup. So we'll put our center screw back in. Tighten our side set screws or grub screws, and then we can actually mount our steering arm to the servo horn. Once we've done that, we can turn the whole truck chassis back over again. So now we have our servo mounted to the chassis itself, and it looks a lot more scale once we get the body on. There's no more servo plate mounting on the front axle itself, and we'll take a Dremel tool and we'll actually cut these mounts off probably once we're happy with the way this all works. And there you have it. We've moved the servo up onto the chassis off of the axle, and later we'll trim the mounting points off the axle for an even more scale appearance. In terms of the quality of the kit, the aluminum is very nice quality, the anodizing is very nice quality. However, it really wouldn't have killed them to include an instruction manual, or at the very, very least, a couple of pictures on a printed black and white piece of paper to show what it should look like when it's properly assembled.